Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm excited to host this virtual PCI Summit, which is a collaboration between Integrity360 and Jscrambler. My name is Martin Petrov and I'm a PCI CTO at Integrity360. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. This summit is dedicated to equipping you with crucial insights and strategies in the realm of cybersecurity and compliance. Our focus will be on the emerging requirements of PCI version 4 and effective strategies for mitigating security incidents and data breach risks, especially concerning payment pages. I'm excited about our lineup of speakers who are leaders in the field of cybersecurity. We will delve into the latest trends, challenges, and solutions that are shaping the industry. One of our goals is to provide you with the knowledge and tools needed to fortify your defenses. Your participation, especially in our Q&A session, is key, and we encourage you to engage actively throughout the event by posting your questions. Let me start by saying a few words about our esteemed speakers and the companies that they represent today. So Integrity360 is a leading cybersecurity firm which provides comprehensive security solutions and managed services. The company was founded in 2005 and offers threat detection, incident response, and risk management to protect businesses from cyber threats. Integrity360 serves various industries, including finance, healthcare, and government, ensuring robust protection and compliance. With a focus on being proactive and innovative, Integrity can help organizations to safeguard their digital assets and maintain operational integrity. The company is headquartered in Dublin, Ireland, and has offices in UK, Sweden, Spain, Italy, Lithuania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. Jscrambler is a cybersecurity company specialized in client-side security solutions, and it was founded in 2010. It provides advanced protection for web and mobile applications against tampering, reverse engineering, and data exfiltration. Their flagship product includes JavaScript obfuscation, real-time application self-protection, and web page monitoring. Jscrambler's technology ensures the integrity and confidentiality of applications, safeguarding businesses from cyber threats and financial losses. Now, let me introduce our first speaker, Richard Ford, who is the CTO of Integrity360, where he collaborates with executive and product management teams to shape the company technology and strategy. Richard has over a decade of experience at Integrity and has held pivotal roles, including Group Technical Director, where he spearheaded the development of the company's managed services. Richard is a trusted advisor on cybersecurity developments, providing strategic guidance to key customers, and is a prominent spokesperson on technical matters within the industry. Having said that, you can take a look at our agenda, which includes a small break in the middle, a demo towards the end, and an exciting Q&A session. Thank you very much for attending. If you have any questions, please be sure to post them into the chat panel. Having said that, I would like to welcome Richard Ford to give us an overview of Integrity360.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martin. And thank you for that excellent introduction there. Probably better than I can do myself. So as Martin said, I'm the Group CTO for Integrity360. And just as we kick off into this PCI Summit, I just wanted to start by really introducing Integrity360 and really kind of talk through who we are and what we offer alongside to complement our payments compliance capabilities. As Martin said at the very start, really talking about who we are. We've been in business since 2005, or even longer than that, really, when we look at our sort of group companies that make up Integrity360. But if we want to look at who we are, I think we can start really with our mission statement, which is really to empower organizations to achieve great things securely. And we do that really through our people. We're very much a people-led organization. That's our culture. Our people, and I'll touch upon those over the next 10 minutes, are our greatest strength in what we deliver to our customers. And PCI and payments compliance, being very people-led from our side, is one of those key pieces. Obviously, we need to align that with the correct technologies, such as Jscrambler, to be able to achieve that. As an organization, we're 520 people spread across Europe, and we're 520 people focused on cybersecurity. So we're a pure play cybersecurity organization, and that is all that we do. We don't step outside of that in the delivery of our services to our customers. And talking about our customers, we service over 2,500 customers across Europe, and we service those through our expertise, of which we have 320 technical cyber experts within our business. So we are the leading pan-European independent cyber security specialists, and we focus in many different areas I'll touch upon shortly. Martin touched slightly on the timeline, but really just to walk through what is the journey that Integrity's been on. And I've been on that journey with Integrity now for 11 and a half years. So over that decade period, founded in Dublin in 2005, we've significantly grown organically during that period up until 2020, where we then acquired CareTower to really extend our reach and our capability, doubling effectively in size at that point, and enabling us to deliver our security operations capabilities and services into Europe, being delivered from Bulgaria. Over the course of last year, we acquired 2 organizations to further bolster the Integrity footprint, one being NetSecure, based out of Stockholm, which really gave us great expertise around Fortinet and other security technologies, but also adding an additional security operations center in Stockholm. And then towards the sort of mid or this time last year, we acquired Advancio, our Italian friends, and welcomed them to the family, which really brought in the PCI capability that we now offer as part of, and the payments compliance capability we brought in as part of Integrity360, and bringing in Martin, Alessandro, and all our colleagues from there. If you look at what Integrity360 provides, we're a full service provider. Yes, we provide technologies and solutions to our customers, but really our value is through our people and through our services, whether that's professional services or whether it's our managed services. From a professional services point of view, we're able to deliver our technology services, our cyber risk and assurance services to help customers shape their journey through cybersecurity, but also doing more objective testing through our cybersecurity testing function, and also responding to customers when they need us most during an incident. And then obviously we have our payments compliance team, which Alessandro heads, and we'll be talking more to him a little bit later on. And then lastly, we have our managed security services, which we provide to our customers to really augment that capability that they have with people, process, and technology to deliver on their security objectives. And really, how do we engage with customers? At the lowest point we engage is that solutions provider, but really where we excel and where we want to work with our customers is really to be that strategic partner. So really understanding those requirements and delivering upon those. And talking about how we deliver as a strategic security partner, we have a very clear approach to cybersecurity, which is really echoed here in our security first model. A very mature approach to security and to taking customers on that continuous cyclical journey around the key areas of security. So making sure that our customers really identify and assess the threats that they face, the critical assets, and their security posture, so they can really then work out what is the right spend, where do we need to put our effort from a security perspective to make sure that we can protect and prevent, protect those critical assets and prevent the exploit of any threats that we face. But then obviously we can build our security walls as high as we like, but unfortunately somebody's always going to have a ladder that's one rung higher than those walls and be able to breach our perimeter, or that traditional perimeter or logical perimeter that we now have. And if we own up to that fact, then we need to make sure that we have an ability to detect and analyze those threats as they enter and are active in our environment, so that we can detect them, analyze them, and then really work out what is the course of action that we need to take afterwards. And that really leads us to that last section of our model, which is to, once we've detected and analyzed those threats, to make sure that we have a capability to respond and recover. and really feeding that background our model to influence our view of how we approach security. Moving on to the worlds of payment compliance, and really, as I said, we're very much a people-led organization, and we have an excellent and strong payments compliance team made up of 36 individuals. During the course of last year, we've added 23 different payment compliance certifications to our capability, delivered over 350 projects to our customers, which is spread across 1,700 plus days of consultancy time. You're seeing significant growth, and most importantly, when we look at our NPS score, sitting up there in extremely high 80.6, which really reflects what a great job our PCI team and our payments compliance team does in servicing our customers. If we look at our position in the PCI world, we are rated or most chosen, number one most chosen for Visa across Europe, and number 4 globally for MasterCard. And then, very importantly, we're since 2018, a proud member of the GEAR Global Executive Assessor Roundtable that's helping to shape the approach for PCI going forward. In terms of our PCI portfolio, it's not just PCI DSS assessments, it's the full width of PCI, whether it's PCI PIN, P2PE, or many other security standards. And actually stepping outside of that with Swift customer security program assessments and beyond. So regardless of the payments compliance challenge, we not only have the people, the certifications, but we have the expertise and credibility to be able to assist our customers on that journey. And lastly, just as I kind of round out, I talk about our capability and our experts that we have in our business, and really to bring that credibility to bear, just a selection of the experts that we have in our business, all of which are available for our customers to talk to, and enable us to really touch upon all of the customer challenges, regardless of their area of cybersecurity, also of their geographic location. So with that, I will hand over, I believe now, to Pedro Fortuna, the CTO for Jscrambler, to talk about mitigating the e-skimming threats and data leakage risks. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Richard. That was a presentation which clearly shows the comprehensive set of services that Integrity360 offers to all kinds of organizations with all kinds of cybersecurity needs. And before Pedro jumps on the stage, let me say a couple of words about him as well. He's a co-founder and CTO at Jscrambler. He leads the company's security research and product innovation. Pedro has more than 15 years of experience in researching and working with web security. His main interests are in the areas of application and web security, reverse engineering, and software engineering. He's a creator of solutions that require code rewriting, sandboxing, or both of those. He also is the author of several patents in application security and a regular speaker at international security conferences. So pay attention to mitigating e-skimming threats and data leakage risks presented by Jscrambler. Just if you unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Richard. Hopefully you can hear me now. Yes?
All good. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So thank you for the lovely introduction. Basically, I've been working in security almost all my professional life. I'm also at the board of advisors at the PCI DSS, and I do a few talks from time to time. And today, I mean to talk about e-skimming and how we can mitigate e-skimming attacks. But first, let's start by establishing what is e-skimming. It is basically the digital equivalent of credit card skimming, but instead of having a physical device installed over an ATM, It's a similar gimmick, but it's digital equivalent. And it works more or less like this. So websites have lots of third-party scripts, which in turn can load fourth-party scripts. And it's also common for scripts to be loaded through iframes. And a typical website will have dozens of third-party scripts like this. Many of the organizations publishing these third-party scripts are very small, potentially don't have very good security practices. Now imagine that just one of these scripts is compromised, and through that, it allows attackers to run a skimmer on the payment page. And not only on the payment page, but on all user sessions at once. So when the user is typing the payment data on the payment form, the skimmer captures this information and sends this information over to what we call the drop server, usually associated with an unsuspecting domain name like coolest fonts. If by any chance coolest fonts is not one of the domains that is currently allowed by the website, because you can restrict the list of domains to where your website is able to communicate, then a variation of this is by exfiltrating the data to the domain from where the compromised script is loading the skimmer, and then from there to potentially any domain, any drop server on the internet. There is one additional variant that it's very common these days, which is like exfiltrating data to a service provider like Google Analytics, because usually Google Analytics is permitted on basically any website these days. And this has been happening a lot. So you might wonder, how is this possible? How can it be so easy to just collect the payment information? Well, the problem originated almost 30 years ago when the same origin policy was defined. And this policy states that for two JavaScript execution contexts, one can only access the DOM of the other if they share the same origin. So if they are from different origins, which we also call cross-origin, this access is restricted, and I'm quoting. But restricted how, if we can do this? So the small snippet of code that you can see a script element loading a script from a cross-origin domain, in this case, jQuery. So we can include this script, and this script will actually benefit from the same level of privilege as any other scripts, first-party scripts that come from the page origin. So in reality, per the same origin policy, embedding a third-party script is allowed. What is restricted is directly writing to or reading from a cross-origin. So this is usually very confusing to a lot of people. This embedding is very convenient for facilitating code reuse and pushing new features fast. And I actually believe that this decision behind the same origin policy is partially one of the biggest responsibles for making web technologies like the preferred method for developing and delivering software to people. I believe that if it was any other way, if they have further restricted the same origin policy, it could have hurt the speed of development. So there's a trade-off here that we have to account for. But for security, it was a terrible decision. Let's take a look at what third-party scripts can do when they are embedded into the payment page. So they can harvest any user inputs, so payment information, and this is invisible to the application owner or to the user's knowledge. They can add more code. They can hijack browser events like mouse clicks or page submission or form submission. They can fully modify the behavior of the web page. They can present false messages. They can trick the user into doing like unwanted actions, like giving away more of their personal information. They can tamper or modify what other codes running in the same scope is doing, and they can contact any external domain to exfiltrate data, etc., and so on. So one question that you might have is there a way to design around this? Like, do we need to live with this, or is there some other way to do it? Actually, there is. We can. There is a somewhat old method that involves moving every third-party script to a cross-origin iframe. So, and then there is no direct contact between the iframe, that script running inside the iframe, and the top window. And we have to, in order to collaborate, like the top window with the script, they have to implement a protocol using the post message. So they have to exchange messages and agree on certain actions when they receive certain types of messages. And we have to do this for every script that we have that we want to isolate inside the cross-origin iframe. So you can see where this is going. This is basically resulting in a lot of overhead just to make sure that we are like isolating scripts and preventing those scripts to just do massive data collection. But the problem with this approach is that these scripts, they basically presume direct access to the page, because they have to do, you know, like analytics, or they have to change something about the user experience. And if they are isolated inside that iframe, they no longer can do that. So in order to make that work, we would have to, you know, like pass information from the top window to every iframe that needs to consume that information. And this is just making the things worse in terms of the overheads and work that we need to do. And this all needs to be maintained. And it's just like too much work. So it is not a surprise that no one is really like using this model anymore. People are just adding scripts to the parent page and like expecting those scripts not to misbehave or not to be compromised and start collecting data. So what can we do to mitigate the problem then? We can do one or more of the following strategies. So number one, we can limit the amount of scripts that are included in the page. For instance, ensure there is a conscious decision about the necessity of each script, because we have to remember that every third party that we decide to include, we're trusting that script can bring more scripts, and we are also trusting in the ability of those organizations to ensure the integrity of their own scripts, that they will not be compromised. We can also, number two, limit which scripts can be loaded, which is different from the previous one in that this defines a subset of the scripts on the internet that we even allow to be loaded on our website. Essentially, we move from a reality where our website can potentially load any script on the web. You know, like when we trust a script, it can load more scripts. And with this, it can't. Like it becomes limited to a predefined list of domains from which we accept to load scripts from. So a very well-known mechanism to do that is content security policy. It uses a security header, and it allows the application owner to define this list. But it can also specify hashes. These are file hashes. So if every script being loaded into the browser calculates the hash, and if that hash is present on this header, it will also be allowed to run. So this can be used as a way to extend the lists with very specific files. It's very similar to another feature that you might be aware of, which is called sub-resource integrity, that also exists in the browser. But there are some critiques to content security policy. It has some limitations. For one, it's not granular enough. Once a script is accepted, it can do whatever it wants. So we cannot further restrict or specify exactly what we mean that script to be allowed to do. So in that sense, it's not good for fighting e-scheming, because, you know, like the e-schemers, they usually come from scripts that our site actually needs, that have been compromised. So we already accepted those scripts. Potentially the domain where those scripts are being loaded from, it's already made the CSP lists. Okay, so, and we are just like accepting whatever behaviors those scripts are doing. It's also easy to break the application, because you have to keep up with what the application is doing, make sure that you are including all the domains. Otherwise, those scripts will not be loaded and potentially breaks the website. And these lists are actually hard to maintain. If you don't believe me, look at this example of a content security policy. This comes from walmart.com. Now imagine at every release, you have to check this list to make sure that it is not missing anything necessary for the website to load. Now, CSP is not the only way that we can limit what scripts can be loaded, but this is a well-known example. Number three, you have to protect the integrities that you use. So we already mentioned one way to confirm that the script has not been modified is through a file hash. CSP, Content Security Policy, and Server Source Integrity offer this capability. But the problem is that in practice, this can only be applied to our first-party scripts, not to third-party. And this is because many third-party scripts can change at any moment without prior notice. And it's impossible to know what their new hash will look like. And therefore, for some period of time, we are breaking potentially the website because we don't know the new hash. Actually, I believe John will talk a bit more about this in his presentation. Another way to do this is by making scripts tamper resistant. So this mechanism involves rewriting the code, which is usually done during the builds. Now, you control the builds of your application, but you don't control the builds of everything that your application uses. So in practice, this kind of restricts the approach to first-party code as well. So it's very similar to the limitations that we saw with CSP and SRI. However, it is good practice to use to apply tamper resistance to your scripts, and you should ask your service providers to use it as well. Therefore, covering third parties like payment service providers, or like, you know, like the Google Analytics things that you might be using. With this protection during the execution of the code, if another script tries to interfere with the integrity of your scripts, your script will react defensively. And the good code protection also protects against something that we call monkey patching, which is a method that allows code to rewrite what other scripts functions do. So it's a way to interfere with the scripts. And lastly, even when we accept a script to run on our page, unlike CSP, which basically allows the script to do whatever it wants, we should limit this script's access and permissions following the least privilege principle. So it's a measure of isolation and security. And to do this, we can use sandboxing inside the browser. So sandboxing is a generic concept. So how it works specifically depends a lot on the solution that we're talking about. So obviously, I'll be thinking and referring to our product, Web Page Integrity, as a mental reference here. And in our case, it works like a transparent layer that observes the behaviors of its scripts at the very moment they are about to happen, and using pre-configured rules or policies, we can either allow or block these behaviors. And the rules are very expressive and granular, so it's possible to be very specific, to have great precision of what we intend to allow or block, and therefore we can allow the scripts to, like, trigger the normal expected behaviors, but block behaviors that the scripts shouldn't be doing in the first place. Okay, so a very simple example: if a script does not need to use the network at all, like it's just like does some local computation, why should we allow that script to, like, contact a third-party domain? We can just like block that, and by doing so, if that script gets compromised, it's already unable to contact any third-party domain, and that alone can mitigate a lot of the problems that we have been talking about. And basically that's it. So from a script perspective, if we allow certain behaviors or if we disallow other behaviors, we say that we are attenuating behavior. We're not blocking the whole script. We're removing some of the script capabilities. Regardless of that scripts already be using those capabilities or not, it doesn't matter. So we're taking away some of the behavior, some of the permissions. We are attenuating the behavior. And another functionality that is extremely effective in mitigating e-skimming is called form fencing. It basically consists of specifying which script needs access to process the payment form. And typically this is just one script, like a well-known script. This hardly changes. Pages are not like switching around which script is processing the form. And potentially this script is doing like client-side validation of the form before the data is sent to the server. And by limiting access to those form fields to that well-known script only, we are automatically and forcefully excluding all other files, known or unknown. So as you can imagine, this is very useful because we're limiting the risk to that one file that we trust, and there's other measures that we can do to even limit what that file can do, other than accessing that form, of course. So one of the things that our customers really value is to have a look at a list of scripts that attempted to access forms or the payment form, because they get a lot of surprises. Like often they see like things they weren't expecting. It allows them to ask questions. Why is script X attempting to access that form, when in reality what it needs to do has nothing to do with that form? So, and this is where we start to gain conscious of like the nature of web applications. There's a lot of things like this happening that we just don't have a clue that they were taking place, let alone taking measures to prevent it. So I think that we can all agree, hopefully by the end of this presentation, that web applications and the browser in particular should have more hygiene in terms of what scripts can accomplish inside the pages. So it seemed appropriate to show you how a schema looks like. This is how one schema looks like. I picked the inventor bridge that targeted Ticketmaster. This is its original form. It's slightly obfuscated, and after you deobfuscate it, you can see what it does. So basically, first step, it checks if it's running in the right URL. Then it iterates all form fields and known IDs so that it can install a click handler. And when one of these fields is clicked, then at that moment it collects all form field values. It also replaces the onSubmit event handler so that when the form is submitted, it has a chance to do something. And when it does, it basically exfiltrates the data to the drop server and runs again after 30 milliseconds. So it's pretty basic, and it requires access to the form. It requires being unmonitored. It requires not having a sandboxing solution blocking some of these actions in the first place. So one common question is, can you delegate the problem away? Well, and I will answer from a PCI DSS compliance perspective, okay? Used to be the case that you could. So until PCI DSS 3.2.1, you could, because merchants started using a payment service provider that would provide an iframe and move the payment form to inside the iframe. This is a cross-origin iframe. So, and back then, this was sufficient to make your page, the parent page, the page that holds the payment form, out of scope for PCI DSS. But now that's no longer true. Since 4.0, now the parent page needs to comply with some of the requirements, including the new anti-e-scheming requirements 643.3 and 11.6.1. So, and the reason for that is that there are now, we now know that there is a number of attacks that could take place on the parent page, that even though the payment form is inside the iframe, it still can result in leaking of the payment information. I'll just mention a couple of examples: iframe overlay and iframe hijacking. There are more. Iframe overlay, if it's a simple concept. So if a compromised script is able to create an iframe, so what it can do is just create a clone of the iframe and just lay it on top of the real iframe, therefore tricking the user into entering the payment information on the fake iframe. And iframe hijacking is slightly more complex, so it requires a compromised script to monkey patch a specific web API. So basically, the set attribute of the iframe elements. So it modifies what set attribute does, and basically planting a sort of a man-in-the-middle attack, where if this method is ran, it will replace the source attribute by an evil URL. So later, when the payment service provider is creating dynamically the payment iframe, and it's trying to set the source of that iframe to secure.psp.com, basically what will happen is that this source attribute will end with evil.com. Okay, so basically it's pointing to the wrong iframe origin. So in conclusion, the whole problem of scheming or data leakage on the client side in general was originated from the way we build applications. So it goes back to, you know, decisions that we made when people were working in things like the same origin policy, and how iframes work, and how we generally develop web applications. And it is a trade-off. Applications are vulnerable to their supply chain. It's not a bad thing that we are developing software fast, but it is worrying for security that we are that vulnerable to our supply chain. So, but the good news is we can do something about it. We have to worry about the problem of integrity on the browser side. And we have to understand that a compromised script can change what the user sees. It can collect all the data. It can capture all the information, and not just for one user. It's actually for all users at the same time, including payment information. So solutions like web page integrity that are based on a behavior-based sandboxing can greatly limit what scripts can do by default, can attenuate their behaviors into a subset that we consider like safe, and can mitigate problems like e-scheming. And sometimes I ask people, what is like the worst thing that they can imagine from a security perspective? What could happen to their assets, to their web apps? And I often get as a response that it is probably a breach to the server that ends up leaking like the entire database. It's, of course, this is a very common answer. It's easy to understand why they say that. But what is not so easy to understand, but what I usually try to convey, is that data leakage on the client side can be as bad as leaking a whole database from the server. Because, like, think about it. All the information passes through the client side before reaching the server. Payment data is introduced in the browser before being transferred to the server. And even worse, on the client side, the payment data is not yet encrypted. While on the server, payment data is introduced in the browser before being on the server. The data will be encrypted, and if captured, it will be basically useless to the attacker. It's garbage if they have done their job properly. So a leaking on the client side, you get clear data, clear text data, and it's usually silent because a lot of people do not monitor the client side at all. So you don't even know that it's taking place. So it's a problem that you need to be aware, and you need to think about like what will be your strategy to mitigate and to get control of the scripts that you are running on the client side. And basically that's it, what I have for you today. Thank you.
That was fantastic and very insightful. Thank you, Pedro. I wonder how many people appreciate this sophisticated way of exfiltrating data, where kind of one or two takeaways for me is that even if you outsource a payment page to a payment gateway that's compliant, it's still not enough. And how dangerous this is by creating a blind spot where you are not going to see anything even in server logs. So having said that, PCI DSS version 4 deals in detail with this kind of threats. And probably many of you know that there's 64 new requirements, of which 51 are future dated. And the reason for this is because of their complexity, cost, and impact. So preparing for new PCI DSS version 4 payment page requirements is what our next speaker, John Elliott, will discuss. A few words about John. He is an expert in regulated security and data protection. John is fascinated by how people engage with security guidelines, whether it's a company following external regulations, an information security developing policies, or an IT team following them, or a colleague just trying to do their job securely. What's amazing is how John has led the protection and information security functions in financial services and aviation organizations. And he comes from an amazing background of Visa Europe and MasterCard, where he also engaged with the PCI Council to contribute on many of the PCI security standards, including the most recent version, PCI DSS version 4, and requirements specifically 643 and 1161. So without much ado, please welcome John. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Hopefully I'm not on mute and everything's working fine.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Take it away.
Great. And hopefully also like the screen sharing is working fine as well, and so I'll kick off. And thank you for that introduction. Yeah, as Martin said, and you probably don't need to see my introduction slide, but I worked for Visa and I worked for MasterCard. I was their rep on the PCI Security Standards Council, so I worked on version 3 of PCI DSS and P2PE, and extensively on version 4 of PCI DSS. And between that, I've implemented it. And a long time ago, like Martin, like Martin is a QSI, I was a QSA. And so, as Pedro's talked about, the problem is that every piece of JavaScript's got access to every page element. And the second lens of the problem is that when we build websites now, we build them by assembling JavaScript in the browser. The vulnerability is, as Pedro described, is that any piece of JavaScript that can be altered can then take data from the browser, as well as manipulating anything in the browser. And the threat is that this is how most data is lost from e-com environments now. This is where most cardholder data theft is happening. And so what we need to do is think about quite heavily, like, what do we do about that? And I used to think this was sort of like a small problem, but the answer is it's a really big problem. If you look at, we did a survey last year. On average, most e-commerce websites have 100 different scripts running them, 100 different bits of JavaScript. About half of them come from the merchant themselves, first-party scripts. The other half come from random third parties. And any script from those third parties can potentially access cardholder data. One of the big reasons for lots of JavaScript on people's websites is something called a tag manager. And a tag manager, if you've not come across it, is a really clever piece of marketing, effectively. Basically, advertisers and marketers want to find a way of tracking people across the internet and being able to re-advertise products to them, advertise products that would be interested in. And so to do that, they require a piece of JavaScript to be added to the website. It was a real problem asking IT or the developers to do this all the time. So somebody came up with the idea of a tag manager, which is basically an application that allows you to put a small piece of JavaScript on your website, and then the marketing department can add other JavaScript. Adobe say very nicely, oh, it shortens development cycles, it frees up developer time, so they can do important work rather than doing stuff for marketers, and allows marketers to gather, organize, and manage website data. I describe a tag manager as a system that was deliberately designed to get information security and change control out of the way so that marketing and digital departments could add any random JavaScript from any random place on the internet to an organization's website. And that's why we now see a plethora of like these 100 different scripts on a website. So given that cardholder data was being stolen like this, and given a new version of PCI DSS was anticipated 3 or 4 years ago, it's not unsurprising that there are 2 new requirements in PCI DSS 4. And I've updated this for version 4.0.1, which came out a couple of weeks ago. The words slightly changed, but it's not unsurprising that PCI DSS version 4 has some new requirements in to address the problem of these 2 new requirements. The first, 6.4.3, says that all payment page scripts, this is what the standard says, all payment page scripts are loaded and executed in the consumer browser are managed as follows. Long text, let me put this in 4 boxes. The requirement is there's an inventory, that the script is authorized, that the script is necessary, and there's some way of validating its integrity. So if I drill into that, there's an inventory. So you have to keep an inventory of what JavaScript is on the payment page. And if it was removed, and you may want to retain that inventory to show your assessor. The second thing is they need to be authorized, like who authorized it when. It doesn't say in the standard who has to authorize it, but in the guidance column it implies that management should do it. And it says very clearly in the guidance in 4.0.1 that this authorization can happen before the script is added or after the script's added. And then finally, that you need to justify why the script is necessary for a business or technical reason. Now, you might think that those 3 requirements, which involve keeping an inventory, which could be on a piece of paper or in Excel or something like that, and having a justification of why it's necessary, and having someone authorizing it, is effectively compliance bullshit. And if you're thinking of that, you're probably right, because part of the intention of the requirement was for people to look at that and say, wow, that is a lot of compliance nonsense. I don't want to do that. Let me understand how much JavaScript's on my payment page so I can reduce it. So the reason for having sort of this identify and govern type of requirement was to make people question whether they needed JavaScript on the payment page, not to just add lots of compliance nonsense activities around it. The fourth part of requirement 6.4.3 was to make sure that the integrity of the script is being validated. Now, the standard doesn't say what it means by integrity, so you take a standard dictionary definition. In other words, the script does what it says it does. It doesn't exhibit malicious behavior, and it hasn't been tampered with. And we'll look at how you might do that in a minute. The second requirement says, well, basically we expect occasionally that you will have unauthorized modifications to the script or to the HTTP headers, and so you need to have an alert that generates that. It's very similar, if you're familiar with PCI DSS, it's very similar to the change detection methodology or file integrity monitoring. So 11.6.1 says you need to monitor script content, security impacting HTTP headers. You need to monitor that periodically or less than every 7 days and generate alert if something changes. So again, diving into those. Firstly, have there been any changes in JavaScript? Secondly, have there been any changes in the HTTP headers? Because one of the ways of implementing protection against this, as Pedro talked about, is content security policy, which is a security header. And if the CSP has been changed, then that's an indication of an attack against the website. And then finally, you need to do that with at least every 7 days or periodically based on a targeted risk assessment. And when you do see an unauthorized change in the script or the headers, then you need to send an alert. And that alert needs to be managed by requirement, according to requirement 12.10.5. Importantly, the alert is to the merchant or to the entity that owns the website, not to the consumer, not to the user of the website. So the next thing is that it says this applies to a payment page. And a payment page is actually defined in Appendix G, the glossary of PCI DSS. It's defined as a web-based user interface containing one or more form elements intended to capture account data that are presented as a single document or instance, that's a document or component in an inline frame within a non-payment page, or as a series of iframes in a non-payment page. And on the right is typically what you get from most payment service providers, so you can control the look and feel of the page. If you're familiar with PCI DSS, you realize that if the merchant's generating the payment page themselves and taking the information back, or sending it direct post to the payment service provider, they're going to be an SAQ AEP or SAQD. And if the merchant's using an iframe solution from the payment service provider, whether it's a single iframe or multiple iframes, they're going to be an SAQA. And interestingly, because of the attacks that actually break the cross-origin policy, or the attacks that put up false iframes, the PCI SSC applied these changes, these requirements, to both the page containing the payment fields, and if you're using an iframe, the page containing the iframes. It says this in some very horribly written words that I'm going to describe better as a picture. And the picture says, the words basically say that if you have payment fields in an iframe, there are two parties responsible for these requirements, and these requirements apply twice. They apply to the contents of the payment page, the iframe. They also apply to the contents of the page that hosts those iframes. I call that the parent page, and that's because of iframe skimming attacks and iframe redirection attacks. And so that was clarified in version 4.0.1. So that's what the requirement says, and that's why it exists. You're probably asking yourself, now, how do we implement that, John? And if you read the requirement to begin with, you sort of have the idea of having a change control process that says, somebody in the business says, I'd like to add some new JavaScript to the page, and then they document why it's necessary, and then InfoSec check it's not malicious, and then it's authorized by someone. If it's not authorized, I guess it doesn't get added. And if it is authorized, the approval's recorded somewhere, it gets added to an inventory, then it gets stuck on the page. And then if somebody wants to change a script, they say, I'd like to change the script. Do they document this? They might need to document the necessity if the functionality or behavior has changed. If they do, they'll document it. Otherwise, they won't. They'll just say, okay, there's a change to the script. Check it's not malicious. Check that change has been authorized. If it hasn't, again, the change doesn't happen. If it has, then record details of the approval, and then update the inventory, and No, you don't need to add the script to the page because the script's already on the page. You've just changed it. And so that's what you might think is like, oh yeah, a very simple change control process to manage JavaScript. The problem is that won't work, unfortunately. And let me explain why that is. If we take three different organizations, I'd call them A, B, and C. One's got 25 first-party scripts managed by the dev team. It's all managed with a big continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline. There's one third-party script and payment processor. That's a very different organization from someone with 6 first-party scripts that's part of their framework, like Node or something like that. They very strictly manage that. But they've got 35 third-party and fourth-party scripts that come from anywhere on the internet because they've been added by digital, by the marketing team, or Entity C, which uses a framework that generates JavaScript dynamically on the fly, which is not uncommon in some of these frameworks now. And then they've got like 120 third and fourth-party scripts added by marketing. These are all very different types of organizations, which is why there isn't a simple answer to how to comply with these 2 requirements. What I want to concentrate on is point you to a couple of words in the standard. So it's really clear that the standard says a method's implemented to confirm that each script is authorized. And then it says in 11.6.1 that you need to have an alert to unauthorized changes. So the focus of the standard is on authorization. Like, do we want this script on the page? And if it changes and it wasn't an authorized change, do we want to keep that change? So the thing I want you to concentrate on when you're thinking about how to implement these requirements are 6.4.3, new scripts should be authorized, 11.6.1, unauthorized changes, which could include new scripts, they need to be authorized as well. The standard doesn't say, in fact, I'm going to cross that out. The standard doesn't say unauthorized scripts must be blocked. It doesn't say that. I've heard some QSAs, obviously not Integrity360 QSAs, but I've had some QSAs say that. So be very clear that the authorization can happen before or after a script gets changed or before or after it gets added to the page. And so what you need to think about is different business processes based on the different types of changes you have. You've basically got 4 changes: a new first-party script, a new script from you, changes to first-party scripts, new third-party scripts, like third-party scripts that could come from anywhere, often added by marketing or digital, and then changes to those third-party scripts. And so what you tend to have is 3 different types of authorization process. A default process for low or zero risk changes, like for your first-party scripts, you might just change comments or change a variable name or something like. You may have a pre-authorization. If you've got a very good change control and a very good CI/CD pipeline, you may well be able to approve script changes before they're added to the website. And then a post-authorization change, because you will absolutely have changes that happen to third-party scripts where you can't pre-authorize it. Like, Google are not going to ring you up and say, we want to change a piece of Google script that you've got on your web page. Can you tell us when it's run through your change control process so we can change it? I mean, that's not going to happen. You're just going to get changes to third-party scripts. What's important is you notice them, which is 11.6.1, there's an unauthorized change, and then you run your approval process. And so, as I say, typically, low-risk changes, you'll default authorize. You might be able to pre-authorize new first-party scripts in mature change control environments, but you mostly do a lot of post-change authorization when you detect the change. And 6.4.3 is very clear. It says, look, where you can't authorize the change, where you can't authorize the script before it's been changed or before a new script's added to the page, the authorization should be done as soon as possible after a change is made. Which means you actually end up with a workflow that looks a bit like this, that something detects, like something in real time, or a monitor detects that you've got a new script. And then what you do is InfoSec check that's not malicious. Of course, if it is, they're going to remove that from the script. If it's not malicious, they'll document the necessity of it. Then somebody needs to authorize it. Assuming it's not authorized, it gets removed. If it is authorized, that authorization gets approved or recorded somewhere, and the inventory gets updated. And so that's a much cleaner script. That's a much cleaner business process, but it relies on detecting changes to scripts on your website. So you need that capability from a tool or a business process. And then secondly, if you have a change script, the change is detected. InfoSec, again, want to check it's not malicious. If it is, it's remove it from the page. If it's not, then check if the behavioral functionality changed. If there was no change to the behavioral functionality, in other words, it could be a really simple change, like somebody changed the name of somebody added a comment or something like that. you probably don't need to do anything. Just update the inventory and say, we noticed this change. It wasn't malicious. The behavior didn't change. There was no problem. If the behavior did change, then someone needs to document why that new behavior is important. Then somebody else needs to authorize it. If it's not authorized, of course, you remove it from the page. And if it is, you record those details and then update the inventory. So it gives you two more interesting type of workflows of how to manage, to manage these two new requirements. And again, that means you need the capability to detect a script change and then to kick off some sort of workflow. So the one thing I'd urge you to do today, now, remember, as Martin said, this is one of those future dated requirements. It comes into effect on the 1st of April next year, to which you might look at your watch and think, wow, 1st of April is a long way off, John. This might take you a long time to implement, along with the other 51 new requirements. And so working out how you're going to do this now is really important. So what I suggest you do is to do some business process mapping. What's the current process for adding new JavaScript? What's the current process for changing JavaScript? Do you have any automation in there? Do you have any dynamic scripts that are generated on the fly? And I can guarantee it won't be the same for first-party JavaScript and for third-party, which means you will probably need like 4 different business processes for new first-party scripts and for changes to first-party scripts, for new third-party scripts and changes to third-party scripts. So what are the options to manage this? There are basically 4. Redirection, CSP and SRI, external monitors, and agents. And let me very quickly just look at those. So a redirection, so at the moment, if you generate an iframe or host the payment fields yourself, you can forget about 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 if you just redirect your customer to a payment service provider's payment page. So now the requirements are not applicable to you. The downside of that is you've lost control of the transaction, you lose the look and feel, and you might lose some statistics or data. The positive side is you don't have to do these two things. The way that the standards, one of the ways the standard says you could do this is what Pedro talked about, is to use content security policy. So you have a very strict thing of like where JavaScript can be loaded from. Here's an example, it's in the HTTP header, you say content security policy, the default source is self, like you can load anything from yourself from first party. You can also load anything from safescripts.foo.com. And you combine that with sub-resource integrity. And sub-resource integrity, as Pedro says, you generate a hash for every piece of JavaScript that's going to be on the web page. You need to generate that as you construct the HTML for the web page, which can be hard for third-party scripts because you need to get the script and generate a hash of it. It's impossible for dynamically generated script because you can't dynamically change the SRI tag. And so what you do is you generate a hash, and you put, and I've given an illustration here on screen of what it looks like. So you've got your script tag, but then you add the hash of the script to it. When the browser loads the script, it also generates the hash. If the 2 hashes match, the script runs. If the 2 hashes don't match, the script doesn't run. And that might be a good thing because it could be a tampered script. But the bad thing is it doesn't run and it doesn't tell you it doesn't run, so it breaks your website. And so it fails silently. SRI would have been great if it sent you an alert and let you recover from it, but it doesn't. So SRIs, we've discovered, is mostly impractical for most people. And so you'll probably need a tool. But before you think about buying a tool, and remember, I'm in the business of selling tools, do the business process mapping first, because that's the most important, to understand how your organization manages JavaScript. And there are really 2 classes of tools. The first is an external monitor. So it's a synthetic user that visits the payment page on your website on a periodic basis. The standard says at least every 7 days. And the standard was deliberately written to allow you to use external monitors. 11.6.1 gives these as an example. It's a synthetic user, so it's like a bot. It looks at your payment page, it retrieves all the scripts, and it says, have there been any changes? And if there have, it sends you an alert. The downside of these is you need to train them to get to the payment page, because sometimes the payment page requires you to log in and to add something to the basket and then to navigate to the payment page. So they fail quite regularly, and you need to retrain them when the thing that you put in your basket goes out of stock, or isn't a thing that the merchant sells anymore, or you change the flow on the web page. So, but you can certainly meet the requirements with an external monitor. And Jscrambler's got an external monitor. It's called our agentless web page integrity. The other way is to do it is to use an agent. And an agent, which we've got to demonstrate in a minute, is JavaScript that's loaded into the page first, and then it creates that sandbox that Pedro talked about and watches what every other bit of JavaScript does. It can send telemetry back to kick off the workflow to generate the inventory, to have the approval and everything, and it can detect changes in real time. And Jscrambler, we have a product that does that. It's called Web Page Integrity, and we can actually block any malicious activity as well. The standard doesn't require that, but our tool will actually block a skimmer from actually skimming the payment card data. The most important takeaway is this, though, which is that you need to understand those business processes and how they will work in your organization before you select a tool. So map your business processes first, and then, okay, how do I want to manage this in my organization? The other thing that you might want to do today is you might not know how much JavaScript you've got on your website. And so Jscrambler and Integrity360 together, we can provide you with a current inventory of all the first-party and third-party scripts. And then you can use this to start that process mapping and discovery. So I hope that's given a really good overview of what the standard says, why the standard says it the way it does, some of the challenges you'll find to implementing it, and some of the positive steps you can take. And with that, I'll hand back to Martin.
Thank you, John. That was amazingly insightful. I myself took a lot of notes, and I hope I can summarize some of them. Now, having said that, we are headed for a small 5-minute comfort break. I invite you to be back at 1:15, where we will have our panel discussion, where we will discuss some exciting questions we have gathered from various participants. Thank you very much, and we'll be back at 1:15. And a very warm welcome back. I hope everybody is online and able to see and hear. It's time for our panel discussion on PCI readiness. I hope to be addressing the impact of new requirements in version 4, and actually it's 4.01. We have like a minor update, if you have noticed. And we'll be doing that through the lenses of people, processes, and technology. I'm very excited to moderate this session, and I hope to provide some valuable insights from our panelists, which today include Frank Crummy, who is the Risk and Compliance Officer at one of our valuable clients, Payzone Ireland. I'm also joined by my colleague, Alessandro Amalfitano, who is the PCI Practice Manager at Integrity360, and our previous speakers, John Elliott and Pedro Fortuna. So let's get started with our discussion. And the first question, which is, what are the main challenges that organizations face when trying to achieve and maintain PCI DSS compliance? I would invite you, Frank, to say a few words on this topic as the representative of the side which is being assessed and has to deal with and prepare for PCI DSS.
Hi, Martin. Thanks very much. Yeah, so as you can see, even from the webinar we've had so far, I suppose one of the first challenges is that the standard is pretty complex, and particularly the new version, trying to understand what the uplift is and what we need to do that. So that requires a lot of attending webinars like this and help from our suppliers, etc. And the other thing I think about PCI overall is that it's not just, you might get audited once a year, but it's an all year round activity. So there's an awful lot of work required to make sure you're keeping up to the right levels of hardware, software, making sure you're doing your scanning at the right times and all that sort of stuff, and remediating any issues that arise from them. And some of that's increasing in PCI 4 as well. So it's not just a one-off every so often we have to do a bit of PCI work. It's all year round. And then because of that, I suppose it's logical to say it's a big draw on resources. It's just a huge draw on a team that, if you've got a small team like we do in Payzone, they're already working on business related tasks, and we have to balance that out with this type of work which is required. And then that also leads to some cost implications for the company. We have to pay for the audit, we have to pay for upgrades, we have to pay for the penetration test, the segmentation testing, and all that. So yeah, quite challenging is the answer. Hope that helps.
Absolutely. I would invite any of our other panelists, if they want to add anything to the challenges that they see from their end when working with various organizations. Alex, do you have a word as being a QSA that has implemented things in various organizations? John?
Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, we can hear you. Fantastic.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think that achieving and maintaining PCI DSS compliance is challenging to the constantly evolving threat landscape and the complexity of the standards, and the organization must continuously update their security measures to address new vulnerability, which requires significant resource and expertise. And ensuring that all systems and the processes are compliant across different departments and locations can be daunting. So regarding maintaining compliance in particular, it's important to note that there is a curve called the company compliance curve, which increases significantly when the period of formal assessment is about to begin, and decreases immediately after the conclusion of the assessment. This should be avoided. I would also like to add that it's important to never see PCI DSS compliance as a 2-3 months effort, but as a continuously activity over time. And this is crucial for maintaining the state of compliance.
Thank you. Yes, we definitely can notice this kind of curve of up and down going throughout the year. So definitely needs to be a lot more business as usual and more consistent which is one of the focus points of version 4. John, do you have any words of wisdom on this one? Anything short?
Yeah, PCI DSS actually contains some requirements that you have to do throughout the year, like quarterly ASV scans and other things like 6-monthly firewall reviews. There are a few requirements that you have to do to stay compliant. But what's really important, I found, managing compliance for big companies, is that what you need to do is create a spreadsheet of all the requirements and say, how often are we going to check that ourselves before our assessor does? Some requirements are really important. They stop people more than other requirements. You can tell what they are from the prioritized approach. And so I always used to think, well, you know, what I want most of all is to be secure, and I want secondly to be compliant. If I check the things that give us the biggest security benefit on maybe a monthly basis, like just very quickly, is this control in place? Is it working? That helps keep you secure. But it also means when you get to your annual audit or your annual assessment, most of the stuff's in place. You don't have that 3-month panic that Alessandro just talked about. Like, oh, it's QSA time again. We need 3 months to get ready. So you have to do it if you do it as a continuous thing, it's a lot less painful.
Thank you. Absolutely. So another question that we have is, what are the essential steps to prepare an organization for version 4? Especially all of the future dated requirements, some 51 technical requirements in April of next year. Alex, do you have some insights on this?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. This is really an interesting question, and the answer is as intuitive as one might think. You know, Martin, someone might suggest that starting immediately with a gap analysis against the PCI DSS standard version 4.0 is the right path. However, it's better to first step back and conduct a scope analysis review in order to check the perimeter within your company to which the PCI DSS applies. So an entity should ask itself questions like, can I reduce my PCI DSS scope? Do I really need all the sensitive data I store? Or can I redesign part of my network to reduce the people, system component, and technology within the perimeter? And can I use technology such as tokenization, hashing, point-to-point encryption, and so on to reduce my scope? And I think that also next question is which standard and regulation must we comply with within an entity? For example, as entity, can we address those certification together to leverage overlaps between standards? Like, for example, PCI DSS, ISO 27001, or DORA or GDPRs with CSP and so on. Because among those standards, there are a number of mapping of requirements. In this way, the entity and the QSA ensure that they are operating within an appropriate perimeter, which does not include people, processes, and technology that do not need to be subject to the PCI DSS certification. This is a win-win strategy, as every next phases in the certification process will be more efficient and require fewer resources from the company, while the QSA can focus on important aspects during the assessment. Only after this, an entity should perform a gap analysis to check the entity's compliance level. This includes training personnel, create awareness, ensuring documented and well-maintained the process and procedures, hardening system properly, and protecting data correctly before conducting a formal assessment. But time matters. So it's very important conducting a gap assessment with a sufficient period of time before the audit. Many new requirements, as authentication scan, for example, ticket scan, disk encryption, payment page script, monitoring, and integrity, as we are saying, can be more or less complex to implement in an entity and may require different amounts of time. Therefore, I think that both companies that are undergoing the certification process for the first time, but also those that are already certified with the previous version of the standard and need to comply with the new requirements, should address this issue well in advance and ensure that the entity has enough time to apply the necessary remediation and it can be certified by desired data. Of course, Martin, there are many other things to consider, but those are some of the important points and that the entity should take into consideration when preparing for PCI DSS assessment.
Wow, that was very useful. So basically, don't blindly jump into a gap analysis. First, think and maybe reanalyze your scope. And then if you have to comply with more than one standard, see if there's any overlap.
Exactly.
I would add actually one other interesting point as part of this element of first looking at what are you doing and how you're doing it before doing a gap analysis is all of those new requirements are very technical. And I would imagine that they would be non-core technologies, non-core processes for a number of organizations. And I would even ask the question, is this belonging to my internal responsibilities, or is this something to outsource? So very useful. Anybody else to add anything? Fantastic. We can move to another question. How can organizations balance PCI DSS security requirements with business needs and strategic objectives? I think that this is something that's for the side of the entities that are being audited as opposed to those that perform the assessment or provide services. So this one goes to you, Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So I was thinking about this. I suppose in our case, the biggest advantage that we have is that maintaining PCI compliance is part of our strategic objectives of the company. It's like PCI is seen as an enabler, as a unique selling point for the company, and it helps us, assure our customers that their data is kept safe. So I think that's a good starting point. However, it doesn't mean that we don't have conflicts between, business activities and PCI activities. We do have that. And I suppose my tips for dealing with that is that, we need open and honest communication at the senior level about what the requirements are from a technical and people, process, and technology point of view. And, and then take a risk-based approach as well, and automate as much as possible to try and reduce some of the workload and overhead, but that's easier said than done. So I really think the communication is probably the biggest thing you can do to try and make sure that, you're communicating to your stakeholders who actually have PCI compliant as a strategic objective, that, we're all in this together, and we need to push together to make sure we maintain our PCI compliance, because it's not an option to not maintain it,
Very interesting. So making sure all stakeholders are engaged and clearly aware of what this means for the organization. Anybody else to add to this topic?
Yeah, Martin, we're also an entity that requires an annual assessment because our agent is on everyone's payment pages, and so I just want to echo what Frank says, that if compliance is a strategic objective, like, you wouldn't advise any of Integrity360's customers to use Jscrambler if we weren't PCI DSS compliant, right? Because you want to protect your customer. It's a 12.8 requirement. And so it has to be seen at that level, as Frank says. It's your strategic business objective is to maintain this compliance to allow you to do their business, which annoys Pedro, because with Pedro's other hat on, he's our chief technology officer, and I keep saying, oh, we need to do this. Pedro's going, well, wow, another thing. So I feel that tension at different times. But yeah, if it's not there as a strategic objective, it's there as a tick box exercise, it becomes really hard work, having worked in organizations where it's a tick box exercise.
Wow, that's very interesting. So I'd like to repeat that one, that Jscrambler themselves, for the work and the service that they provide, they have to be themselves PCI DSS compliant, and they are. So your data and all of the services that you obtain from them will not threaten the security of your organization. Next question leads me to Pedro, because it's a little bit more technical, I believe, and it goes like this: how can organizations incorporate PCI DSS compliance into their software development processes?
Well, I think you have to have a strategy when developing the software. Your software is not necessarily all of it in scope, so you have to first get your bearings and understand how much of your software is in scope for PCI DSS. And if it's a lot of it, you might as well just like put everything in scope, because like you will be benefit security wise, because PCI DSS is not just something that you do in order to be able to open the shop every day. It's actually meant to make your company more secure. And developing software like we do that is meant to secure people's web application, I think it's of fundamental importance to have secure coding practices. So I would recommend people to bring in and to frame good secure development. I mean, you have lots of resources on that. You can go to OWASP website. There's lots of like excellent NIST resources on doing secure development. And there's also a lot of that inside the PCI SSE. So what I recommend is that you educate developers. Don't put security as something for the security team only, because that will set you up for failure. I think when you develop software, it's very important that you see developers as as ambassadors of security. They need to understand what they're doing. They need to understand why things are done a certain way. And when you are involved when you have to be compliant with PCI DSS, this is fundamental, because if you already do that, you're much closer to comply with the standards that you need. I mean, whether that is PCI DSS or one of the other ones, you are much closer to having the job done.
Interesting. That's very useful, especially from somebody with such a technical background and years in web application security. So my next question is, what are the main challenges in effectively applying PCI DSS to an organization? Will it impact business production, daily tasks, and so on? So this, again, a little bit with a focus on the organizations that are subject to PCI DSS, and I will invite here Frank to share his insights.
Yeah, Martin, I mean, I probably mentioned some of these points before, but it is worth reiterating. My experience is that, it definitely does impact on your daily tasks and your activities. We've got a small team here who are busy doing, day-to-day activities for the business, and they're also the team that makes sure we stay PCI compliant. So it's an ongoing effort from, across various teams, and even from the previous question, the development team as well have a role to play. So it's across the whole business. Everybody has a role to play to help with the PCI compliance. So I think it's impossible that it wouldn't impact on day-to-day activities. And it does take some time and money and investment from the business to make sure they maintain PCI compliance. I mean, it's hard to put a figure on it, but there's quite a lot of investment, not just the actual audit costs and the upgrade costs, but just if you add up the cost of those activities. Now, I suppose you shouldn't just look at it as, getting the PCI certificate. They're all activities that are designed to keep Payzone safe and to keep our data safe. So regardless of whether we needed to be PCI compliant or not, we probably should be doing them anyway. So I suppose my final point would be that, there are occasions where you need to prioritize your PCI work over your day-to-day work due to, urgent requirements coming up, or, particular risks and threats that are out there. So it just needs to be done in a transparent and open manner, and it needs a lot of good planning and management as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I just want to add is that while it requires an investment, the return on this is that you are not, or your organization is not in the news about being compromised.
Yes.
So that's something probably a lot more costly, but often you can't measure it until it happens to you. And that brings me to my last question. Why should someone care about PCI DSS compliance? On the tail of my last comment. John, a very open question.
Yeah, I'm probably the least, having spent like 14 years doing mostly PCI DSS and worked for 2 card brands writing it, I'm probably one of the worst people to answer this question, but I'll give it a shot. The first thing is that somebody's contractually obliged you to be PCI DSS compliant, right? If you're a merchant, you've signed a contract with your acquirer that says, I will be PCI DSS compliant. If you're a service provider like Frank or like us, we've signed contracts with our customers saying we are PCI DSS compliant. And so I think if you sign a contract, you probably take it quite seriously about like abiding by the rules of that contract. Your acquirer could decide that they didn't like you not being PCI DSS compliant and do something about it, like not let you acquire any transactions. Your acquirer could be quite cross with you. And the worst thing is what I call an ex-post event. So let's say something goes wrong, like you have an account, you have a data compromise, or you have an attack. The thing with PCI DSS is that firstly, it's in your contract, right? So basically, you're judged by, did you do the right thing by, are you PCI DSS compliant? If you're found to be not compliant, you have a data breach, the full wrath of the card brands will descend on you, which is actually basically money. They just, like, you get fined. The second thing is most data protection regulators in Europe say that PCI DSS is the appropriate technical and organizational measure to protect cardholder data, right? Which is what GDPR says, and cardholder data is personal data. And so secondly, you can't demonstrate you did the appropriate technical organizational measures to comply with GDPR. And then thirdly, that's something you won't be able to say in the press when it's on, it's not called Twitter anymore, when it's on X that you had a cardholder data breach, right? You won't be able to say, oh, but we were PCI DSS compliant, because you weren't. And so from a reputational perspective and from a financial perspective and from a relationship with your acquirer perspective and from a data protection perspective, it's probably important to be PCI DSS compliant while that's still a requirement.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I'm curious to hear what Alex, representing the assessor side of things about it.
Yeah, Martin. Also, I want to say something more specific as for customer perspective. I agree with what John said, but one consideration that I would like to add is that the goal of every company is to serve its customers in the best possible way, ensuring their security and earning the trust of the customer. We all know that it takes years to earn customer trust, but only 1 minute to lose it. So the number of cybersecurity attacks is continuously increasing year after year, and the reputational damage these attacks cause are greater than any possible fine imposed by payment brands or regulatory authority. So those PCI DSS, which offer 360-degree security baseline for an entity, covering physical security, data security, access control, security testing, and so on, protect an entity against these attacks and prevents the entity from having overlooked security weakness, such as human factors, supply chain risk, service providers that access physical security, etc. So PCI DSS is one of the more complete standards in the industry and protect entity against attacks, thereby protecting the company reputations and the trust that customers have in the company. And I think there is nothing more important than this. And this is why company and the people who care about the success of their company should take care of PCI DSS seriously.
Fantastic. Very useful contribution. I would like to thank our panelists. If you have any questions, their contact details and presentations will be shared. With this, I would like to move on towards our demo part of the summit, because what is such an event without actually providing some kind of a practical way to deal with some of the issues that we have discussed. And to do this, we have invited Jeffrey Cleveland from Jscrambler, who is the sales engineer with over 6 years experience in cybersecurity. Jeffrey has helped numerous organizations to understand their client-side risk and identify their compliance obligations. Jeffrey serves on the industry advisory board of the College of Cybersecurity at Anderson University in South Carolina, and will take us through a 15-minute demo of the application that can help with a lot of those problems developed by Jscrambler. Take it away, Jeffrey.
Thanks so much. And thanks for the intro. Sometimes that's the hardest part. So I'll jump straight into the dashboard here. John mentioned much earlier in the presentation that there are a lot of different ways that we can supply this product, be it with an agent, with code in the page, in the payment page, or by remotely monitoring that page. But what's great is no matter which deployment method you choose, the user experience is the same. So it's all driven through the same portal. I'll make a couple notes where it might differ. Of course, as John also mentioned, that if you have the agent, we can take a couple extra actions to protect you and your clients, and I'll point out where those come into play. One of the biggest things, the most unique aspects of our product is the way that we handle approvals, the way we handle inventory, and the way that we monitor integrity. And I want to start with one of those, the inventory. In here, within the payment page manager, we've got the inventory for the entire payment page. And the way we sort these particular scripts is into what we call vendor services. And it's exactly what the name implies. It's made up of the vendor and the service they're providing. In this case, I've got Google and the tag manager service that they're providing. In this case, made up of just one script. But if this was made up of many different scripts, or even if it's made up of things like dynamic script or multiple versions of the same script, you would see all of that appear here under this single entry. And this allows you to quickly identify which vendor these scripts actually belong to, but also allows you to manage them as a group. And I'll take a look at that here. The next step of what we need to do is to authorize these scripts, and we flag scripts that should be authorized by your team with this needs review button. You'll see that there are a few that have already been approved, showing that green check, and I've got 2 to review today. And one's going to show us when a new vendor service is detected in the page. This one here being Stripe, reflecting that this particular site has swapped to Stripe here recently. You'll see that this was detected quite recent, as of just yesterday morning, and is now showing because it's brand new. We can go through and take a look at the behaviors and what they want to do, because this is how we're going to track their integrity. When we look, we can see that when the card data appears directly in a form, they want to access that directly. When necessary, they want to generate an iframe, likely for the capture of that card data. Iframe source is from stripe.com. And then when they want to do a network transfer, they're sending data back to stripe.com. All of this makes sense for their particular vendor service, right? Very normal for what we would see with a PSP. And so it's easy for us to come through here and move into the next step of authorizing this vendor. We provide for this to be done completely within this interface. Once I go to the authorize step, I'll get a little card that allows me to add that justification. Hey, why are they here on the page? This one's quite easy. They're at the payment processor. And then I can either allow all of the behaviors that have been detected, or I can customize that. And this is where we'll start to see the difference between remote monitoring and the agent-based solution. If I go to customize, this will allow me to start making rule sets for the agent, but I want to talk about that in detail on our next example. For this one, we're very happy with what Stripe is doing on the page, and so we'll simply save their behavior. And once this is done, it will form what we call in the background a behavior contract. And as long as Stripe and the scripts that make up Stripe only want to do exactly these behaviors, we'll consider their integrity to be the same. If they haven't changed, they don't need to be reviewed, they don't need to be reauthorized. This saves you from the kind of the trap of CSP and SRI together, where if you have SRI and a script changes even minutely, say it's something as simple as a comment or just a refactoring of a section of code, but not affecting the cardholder data, it could drop off in the CSP SRI model. In our model, we'll keep that script authorized so long as it has not changed the way it handles the card data. But what happens if it does, right? In this case, Full Story is exactly that. They have changed the way that they're handling card data. We'll see that in here we have a history where the script was originally authorized by John F. down here and now has fallen back into needs review because some of its behaviors have changed. And we can take a look at what those changes are. We're provided with a synopsis. Hey, there's data going to new domains, new fields being accessed, and new iframes being generated. We can go in here and take a look. If we look, we can see that this iframe is not being generated by the same source. It's accessing all the card data where previously it was only accessing email. And then on the network transfer side, we have a couple extra domains that, if you'll pardon my naming of this particular domain, can cause us some concern that this data might be going somewhere that it really shouldn't be. So what can we do? With the agent-based solution installed, when we go through this authorized vendor process, we can hit customize. Our reason, our justification is still here because they're here for the same reason, but now we can go through and block some of these behaviors. And when I do that, these blocks will be turned into rules for the agent to follow. And when I hit save, I'll be prompted to apply those authorizations, apply those rules to the agent. And from there, our services will generate a brand new version of that agent, move it out to our CDN to make it available for the very next client to go through checkout, and will stop any of these particular accesses in that session. It doesn't interfere with the checkout process. It still allows someone to go through, and I'll show quite quickly over here on our Jscrambler shoe store, where someone can still go through with a normal transaction, right? They can still enter their card information, still go through exactly the same experience that they would be used to in making a payment, even though the agent is stepping in and making some corrections in this regard. So they get sent straight to a confirmation page, just like they would regularly expect, and their interaction with the site is done. So even though we have reason to believe that, hey, maybe there's some skimmer code in there, it's not allowed to execute on the client side. It's not allowed to do that skimming because of the existence of that agent. The last thing that I want to cover is going to be around some of the requirements that directly meet 11.6.1, where we're monitoring for changes to security-related headers, right? We've already taken a look at monitoring JavaScript and securing the changes to that JavaScript. Here, I've got HTTP headers where anytime either new header is detected or a new value for that header is detected, we'll ask for it to be reviewed. You can come in here, click review, and either authorize or discard those headers. Any that are authorized will become part of the baseline and won't generate further reviews, alerts, while those that are discarded will be alerted on the next time they're observed. Once that's been done, any further alerts that come from either the change of a vendor in a way that that could affect the cardholder data, a new vendor service, a new header, or a new value for that are the only types of alerts that you're going to see. No headers that, no alerts that come from, say, a small change in a vendor, an addition of a script by a vendor, dynamic script by a vendor, are not going to generate alerts that need to be monitored within the product. At the same time, we do also provide services where we help with this management, initial setup, servicing, looking at alerts on your behalf. And this can help you to kind of manage the especially initial setup, but then ongoing management of these two requirements. The last two things that I'll mention are integrations. We do provide for webhooks to drive these alerts into existing systems that you already have, largely SIMs, but also TIP, SOAR, other systems that you may be using. And then we allow for single sign-on integration as well, so that you can set permissions and different users from your own organization without having another sign-in portal. Yeah. See if there's any other questions related directly to the demo here. Otherwise, I will pass back to you, Martin.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If there's any questions from the audience, now is the time. Otherwise, I'm happy to move to our Q&A session. Okay, we have no questions. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. We have about 10 minutes left. So I see that we have a couple of questions popping up, which I would like to invite our panelists again, if they would be around to answer some of those. Fantastic. So I can see that the first question is, how detailed is the standard about what the alerting required is and how quickly it needs to be responded to? I think that this is a very technical one for Jscrambler.
I don't know. I think this is just like, your QSA. It's a standard QSA question. It's actually a really interesting question, and I'm going to be quite weird about it. Okay, so if you look at the way the standard changed, it used to be in version 3 that the standard had on each requirement, and this you need to do something. And now it's all in, it was all in one section. And now it's actually, in each requirement, it says generate an alert or something. And requirement 12.10. I am getting to the answer, Marty, without, but I am getting there. Requirement 12.10.5 says you need to have an incident response plan that includes monitoring and responding to alerts from a list of systems, including 11.6.1. But it doesn't say how quickly you have to do that, right? There's no requirement in the standard that says your SLA needs to be this or needs to be this. It does say that you have to have in requirement 12.10 that you have to have people available 24/7 to be able to respond to alerts. But the standard doesn't actually say you have to respond in a certain time. And so that's very much based on risk. Like if your central logging system said, 16, you've got a new administrator account just created, you'd probably want to respond pretty quickly if it wasn't something you expected. If you have an alert that says, from file integrity monitoring, it looks like something in the system folder's changed, you might want to think, I probably need to do that within a day. So it leaves it up to you. What's really important is that you have a business process that says how quickly you respond to alerts and how you respond to alerts, because that's a requirement of 12.10 that your assessor will look at. And then they will look at the fact that you followed your process when you had an alert. But in terms of is it detailed? I could have answered that question by just saying not very. I'm sorry. It's not very detailed about how quickly you need to respond to it. It's very detailed about what you need to respond to, but not very detailed, and very detailed that you have to have a plan, but not detailed about what's in the plan.
Interesting. So what I would say is don't let your QSA push you around. Just have a proper analysis, risk analysis, and justify your response time.
Yeah.
But is it safe to say that you want to be responding within a day at least? I can't imagine kind of a busy production environment with 24/7 missing this for days and days on.
Totally. And it's actually quite interesting, because if you're using a scanning-based solution to look for changes in payment pages, it says you need to do it at least every 7 days. So it assumes that something could occur, and you might not notice it. I can't remember. We have another question about file integrity monitoring. I can't remember what the periodicity of file integrity monitoring is in the standard, and I should do, because I should know the words that it says. But it's a similar one of like, how quickly do you respond to FIM alerts? To which the answer should be really quickly, because most of the attacks I've dealt with in organizations I've worked was detected by FIM alerts kicking off, because bad guys changed the DLL.
So self-respecting, reputable organizations would want to do that within
24
hours, maybe a few days, as a best practice.
Yeah.
You can always have an exception where you can justify it differently and have a different cadence. And how does file integrity monitoring play into this? Like, what are the differences and the similarities? And
yeah, Great
Is there a
question.
way to unify the efforts about solving those two requirements?
Like, why do we need all these new requirements if we've got file integrity monitoring? Is a sort of good question, and the answer is that unfortunately, a lot of websites don't come from files now; they come from content management systems which are based on databases. So file integrity monitoring wouldn't get changes in JavaScript because the change is going to be made in some sort of database content management system. The second thing is that even if you had a completely file-based website, it would only pick up changes to first-party JavaScript, not to third-party JavaScript, and to first-party JavaScript that was served from that file system and not another file system. So, really, the couple of examples that I always talk about was was British Airways, where the change to the JavaScript was actually on a secondary web server. And it was a library that hadn't been changed for an awful long time. Ticketmaster, as Pedro showed, was a change to a third party. You could only see changes to third-party JavaScript in the browser. And because JavaScript can be very dynamic, reading the static file might not tell you that piece of JavaScript loads another piece of JavaScript. So really, they're complementary. It's the only place you can see JavaScript changes is in the browser.
Very interesting. So the conclusion is you can't kill two birds with one stone on this one.
Sadly not, no.
Clear. Okay, we are just on time, I think, with the last two questions. How can organizations stay informed about changes and updates to PCI DSS standards?
I'll give the council answer is go to the PCI DSS website and subscribe to the PCI monitor, which will give you an email every time there's an important change. Martin, I'm sure Integrity360 have a service where you talk to your clients about this all the time as well.
Yeah, I suppose staying regularly in touch, and we ourselves are quite proactive to make sure that our clients have enough time to prepare and not be caught by a surprise. Is something typical, and I particularly expect that there will be some changes to version 4, because historically the council always incremented the version once all of the future dated requirements became mandatory, simply because of all the lessons learned and the feedback from the industry. So this is actually quite important. I expect sometime in the spring of next year that version 4.1 will come out, because that has been the historic trend. Okay, and the last questions. What are the implications if I do not have my version 4 assessment ready by April of 2025?
Well, I hope you've already done a version 4 assessment, because version 4 became in force on the 1st of April 2024. So everyone's doing an assessment now should be doing a version 4 assessment. Our assessment last year, we did ours in September last year. We did a version 4 assessment because it was coming up. So everyone should be either having a version 4 assessment or have done a version 4 assessment. Of course, there are 51 new requirements that become in force on the 1st of April 2025. I'm going to give you two answers. Your contract with your acquirer suggests that you have to maintain compliance with the latest version of PCI DSS, which means that you need the new requirements in place on the 1st of April 2025 to meet your contract with your acquirer. However, no one's going to look until you get your next annual QSA assessment or you fill out your next self-assessment questionnaire. So you should have them done by the 1st of April 2025. You must have them done by the time of your next assessment after the 1st of April 2025.
Of course,
So
that is assuming that you don't are unlucky to get into an incident, and then people will check if you are at that moment complying with the latest.
Which is why you should do it by the 1st of April 2025. You should not have an incident, and then you must have it in place by your first assessment after the 1st of April 2025.
I suppose also the question is, what happens if April 2025 comes around? Let's assume, for this example, that your annual assessment is sometime in, let's say, September or October of 2025. Would you have to comply with those future dated requirements in April? I suppose the short answer is yes.
According to your contract with your acquirer, yes.
Yes, because compliance and validation are two different things, and people need to differentiate and not mix them up. Fantastic. So we are out of time. I want to thank you all. I have basically a minute to wrap up. Thank you very much for everybody joining this webinar, both our panelists, presenters, and everybody who joined remotely. Just a few words. Version 4 introduced some 64 new requirements. This is approximately 25% increase. Both the standard and the reporting template has grown by more than 150%. Many of the future requirements are future dated because of their cost and complexity. And just to give a context that when the standard was first published, it gave organizations 2 years to make sure that they have enough time to implement those, which once again speaks about some of the challenges that are expected to be met because of their complexity, costs, effort associated. We're now less than a year into what's left for those 51 future dated requirements. So make sure that you're not delaying things any further if you have been complacent. We paid particular attention in this summit to 2 particular requirements that deal with e-com payment pages and payment scripts. What's worth remembering is that a typical organizations will have 100 plus scripts. And some of the challenges come from the fact that, first of all, multiple departments may have different interests in those. And then you have also third parties who have their scripts, which makes it very challenging, for example, for the authorization part, where you need to make sure that everything is approved. What is also worth mentioning is that there is no silver bullet for a lot of those requirements. And even if you are thinking about using an iframe, you still have responsibilities in maintaining the security and integrity of those payment scripts. So having said all of that, I'm delighted that you were here today with us. Thank you once again, and until we meet again. Bye-bye.